I was young once. I probably thought this was a bunch of crap. And I may have mentioned this once or twice, but I think Governor J.B. Pritzker is just a terrible governor, and what an embarrassment he's been to the state. And he's come after law enforcement and called us Nazis and jackbooted thugs. And, you know, what a horrible person to say those things about the hardworking men and women in law enforcement and all our first responders who are out there doing just a fantastic job every day, day in and day out. God, I pray every day we get rid of that man in November. And if we don't, this state may never be the same. You know, you got to remember, if you're not a U.S. citizen, and I know this is being argued out there today in politics, but if you're not a U.S. citizen, should you be afforded the same judicial process as U.S. citizens? I say no. You know, if you're here illegally, I don't think just being on American soil, you get the same judicial process. And I can hear the liberal heads out there exploding as I say that, but let's be clear.
Welcome to Around Will County. Today, Dr. Jim Reilly recently dropped his new book, available right now on Amazon. More Community Policing, Less Politics. Hardback, paperback, Kindle, however you get your reading fix. Go grab it, seriously. Now, real talk. How's your local PD holding up? Too much politics? Not enough boots on the ground? Drop a comment right now. Tell us what sucks, what works, and what you'd fix tomorrow if you could. We'll be exploring these and other topics today with the author of More Community Policing, Less Politics, Dr. Jim Reilly. And hey, if you haven't already, hit that like button and please subscribe.
Here we are, a cool, blistery day in February. Dr. Egan, Mr. Dick Tyler.
Dr. Reilly.
Dr. Reilly. Yeah.
So we have a very special episode of Around Will County today.
Yeah, and I want to say thank you, and to, of course, Mrs. Egan, our IT lady.
We have a celebrated author,
Well,
a published celebrated author with us right now.
Well, let's be honest, I twisted their arm and asked them to do a special short podcast to celebrate the publication of a project I've been working on for a couple of years. It's a book. Actually, my second publication. My first publication would have been my dissertation in 2019. As someone in academia, sometimes you are kind of expected to take your dissertation and turn it into a book. And that's what I did. I thought the 2019 dissertation, which is, law enforcement methods to improve community relationships, is kind of dry. It's statistical, quantitative data that, isn't really something the average person would want to sit down and read or absorb. So,
sure?
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I sent it to your wife. She said no. Yeah, she said no, I'm not going to read it. Yeah. So,
TLDR.
Yeah.
Too long, didn't read it.
Yeah. So what, a lot of people do is they turn their dissertation into a book. There's a guy out there named Mike Jenkins, who I reference. He was in law enforcement and kind of did the same thing. And I kind of copied off him and turned my dissertation into a book called More Community Policing, Less Politics. Took about 2 years, and I thought the time was right to kind of reflect on what's happening in our state of Illinois and Will County and how politics has really taken over policing. And I don't think that's a good thing.
Which begs the question, what does the discussion of community policing have to do with politics?
Well, I think there's two different things going on there. I think back around 2019, 2020, Governor J.B. Pritzker and, several governors across our country really felt the need to take over law enforcement or give law enforcement a new direction, especially after George Floyd incident. Politicians felt like they need to justify their positions and kind of painted law enforcement in a bad light with what happened up in Minneapolis. And, and this is what I don't like. They kind of take that view and put it on every law enforcement officer out there. And we have 1.2 million law enforcement officers, and the actions of one or two just doesn't reflect all law enforcement. So they came out, and here in Illinois specifically, Governor J.B. Pritzker came out with that Safety Act bill, which is just horrible. Just a horrible bill. Has been since day one, continues to be a horrible bill. And let's hope we can get rid of it in the very near future.
Let's take a step back and talk about what exactly is community policing. So the evolution of policing. You had pointed out in your book that policing started with slave patrols.
I think it did, yeah. But, way back in the early days, policing was slave patrol, and they were often used to control parts of our society or cultures or civilizations, and maybe not the best light for what what we are today. That's for sure. But policing in general, even back then more was paid patrol, and now we're paid by society. Back then it was private paid, and they controlled parts of our society. I think we've come a long way, obviously.
So you're saying that today it's evolved in time to show more involvement of the community that is being policed. Maybe back in the 30s and 40s, people think of the police as with the billy clubs and beating
Yeah,
people up, and
yeah,
that has come a long way, baby.
yeah.
So,
Well, 100%. And I mean, I think that the term community policing is started right around 1980. That's when individuals started to take policing and realized we had to get away from the militaristic kind of post-Vietnam era law enforcement. Oftentimes people were coming back from the military and coming back from that conflict and getting hired by law enforcement agencies. And really law enforcement became a very pro-militaristic structure. And it continues to this day in the backbone of law enforcement. It's still structured somewhat parallel to military. But they really wanted to make it a more softer and kind of a more get back into the community and get to know your community, kind of like they were back probably post-World War II. I think that's probably when law enforcement was riding around the neighborhoods and knowing their communities and knowing the shop owners and out of their squad car. I think post-Vietnam War, they kind of got more into, that you're talking after the riots in Chicago and the Democratic riots, here locally, where law enforcement really kind of, I don't want to say they got off on a wrong path, but definitely kind of took on more than maybe they should have.
is that more of the stop and frisk era, or was that more of the trying to evolve towards the broken windows era?
Yeah, well, I mean, the broken window theory is kind of a basis for community policing. And that's where you go into your community, you allow your law enforcement officers to identify communities or areas of interest or high crime areas, kind of using an intelligence-led policing, where you look at statistical data or calls for service, and then you deploy your troops or resources based on those calls for service. So that really, I'm a big supporter of intelligence-led policing. I think that gives your troops the individual power to have the authority to go into their communities and address issues. That the broken window theory is kind of one window is broken in a community and left unattended. Well, the next week there'll be 2 windows and 4 windows and 8 windows, and you really start to see the disintegration of a community if the underlying minor issues aren't addressed.
Isn't that Rudy Giuliani's premise when he first took over in New York City to combat the
Yeah,
crime that was out of control?
yeah, well, definitely, and I think you're going to see that. Yeah, definitely, they tried to identify areas that needed, where they don't want to just be going and repeated calls for service without addressing the underlying issues. Where
But you also point out that the broken windows theory then led to racial injustice.
Okay, so here's the fallback, and I think we're skipping around a little bit, which is great because we don't really have a format here. But the racial injustice comes from going into a community and identifying the underlying issues and addressing those issues, no matter how small they are. So what happens then is you go into a community where, especially minority communities, and you identify the problems that exist. Some of those can be social economics problems. Some of those can be drug abuse. They can be alcohol abuse. They can be loud music. Well, the problem is they found out with community policing, is what you want to be very sensitive to now, looking back, is you don't want to over police a community. So you don't want to go in and continue to write open alcohol tickets where the community feels like you're not there to support them. You're there to over govern them. So that's a big part of my book is, and I call it the reform community policing, in the sense that we have to look at where community's been, the community's been, and then community policing has been over the last 40 years. And it's kind of time to change. And one of the things would be obviously being very sensitive that we don't over police any community, because then that tends to have a negative, drawback to it.
So one of the questions that I have that comes up in some of the later chapters is that you want to solve for the root cause of the problems. And the root cause of the problems, comes down to maintaining the infrastructure, reduction of signs of disorder like graffiti and stuff like that, and designating patrol zones so that the police actually get to know their own place where they're patrolling.
Yeah, so several of those things that are worth addressing. I'm a big proponent of where we need to change going forward in community policing. Is I am very big into empowering the deputies that are out working the streets and allowing them to take on their areas of assignment and address issues that maybe keep reoccurring, recurring calls for service. Let me use an example. We're not too far away from a truck stop that is kind of run down, and we get numerous calls for service for this one location over and over again.
They have really cheap gas, though.
I know. And everybody goes there for their gas. I understand. I might even have fallen victim of that myself. Yes. But what we have to do is go in there. And what happens is, these businesses are often remote owners, and they don't really care about the aesthetics of the business. They don't really care about the repeated calls for service. They're in another state just looking at how much money am I making from that location. Well, in law enforcement, if we're getting repeated calls for service for a certain location, we would come in and identify that location and look around. I think first thing you do is address the kind of aesthetics. So, and I'm not going to name that specific business, but maybe they don't cut their grass often enough and it gets kind of raggedy looking. Maybe they have a building there that isn't open and it has a boarded up window that doesn't look the best. And that's kind of what draws in your criminal elements, is that neglected look to a community or a specific business. And by empowering your local, assigned deputy to that area, who maybe even partners up, depending on how much work needs to be done with another deputy, let them go in, even change their shift or their schedule and allow them to go in and meet with the business owner and say, hey, we're not here to write you tickets. We're not here to, I talk about it in the book where we should have a resource of ordinance tickets. We're not here to do that. We're just here to say we're getting too many calls for service at your business. How about you cut your grass? How about you tear down that building? How about you paint this building? How about you put in better lighting? There's kind of a, crime prevention through elemental design, is, a part of it. And that really can make a significant difference to where the business is now less of a burden on law enforcement. We're getting less calls for service. And maybe even that it helps that business, where some people might drive by because the parking lot's too dark. Maybe they now start going to that business and it gets, improved revenues.
I think, too, just having a deputy that cruises through their parking lot or goes in and talks to the cashier every once in a while and says, hey, I know there's Deputy Jim. He's here again. How you doing?
Yeah.
And kind of develop a relationship with the people that are there.
Yes.
Not as a
enforcement,
sure, but as a resource that they could be comfortable going to and talking with.
Yes, 100%. And now I use that location, but especially if you're talking more of a downtown area or where a deputy could, get out and walk the downtown area, get out and walk the businesses and meet the shop owners and introduce yourself and give them your cell phone number. and just kind of have a more personal touch with that business or downtown area or defined location. We've seen, if you go back to the early 1990s when the city of Joliet adopted community policing. I think it was 1991, 1992, and they did a fantastic job. The city of Joliet and the Joliet Police Department kind of brought community policing to the Will County area. They had a chief of police named Dennis Nowicki, who came down from Chicago as a commander and kind of introduced community policing to this area. So he should be given credit for that. And I was actually the first officer that Chief Nowicki hired for the city of Joliet. So, you're always thankful for that chief that gives you a chance. But he did a great job by bringing community policing to our area. And if you go back to that, they'd went through the city of Joliet and assigned high calls for area, in certain areas, defined geographical location. And, one would be the Second and Richards area. And that was kind of a defined geographical map. And they assigned officers to that location. And that was their area. They responded to that, as well as patrol officers. But then when you got to know the business or maybe the neighborhood, they were actually raking yards back then. If you remember, it was in the newspaper. They were helping people cut their grass, picking up trash, fixing windows, removing abandoned cars. It was very, very well received. The community, to this day, the city of Joliet is still doing a great job with their community policing, and they deserve a lot of credit.
Was that the same time period when they went to bicycle patrols?
Shortly thereafter, you
Okay.
did see, especially the community policing guys were assigned to an area. So let's say they were up on the hill, then you'd give them a bicycle and they could really make contact with get them out of the squad car,
Sure.
and get them riding around the neighborhood. The people really enjoyed that. Yeah. And to this day, I think they enjoy it.
I think after then we ran into some economic difficulties in the country, and unfortunately, then to have the amount of people on the streets, you need a certain amount of officers, and when you start to have budget cuts, everything suffered.
It did. And that really started to hit our area hard in the 2008, 2009, the collapse of the real estate market and the economy and the stock market. And budgets got a lot tighter. And they were pulling deputies. Specifically, the sheriff's department has never had community policing, which is unfortunate. But the city of Joliet actually were pulling officers out of the community policing unit and putting them back on patrol assignments because they were short on budgets.
What would you attribute that to? Why the city police could do that and county police didn't?
Just the leadership has never welcomed it or, been that proactive to accept it or bring it into the sheriff's department. I think that's why, we certainly need new leadership. And, we're going to see that here in November.
Well, certainly if there's anybody from the Will County Deputy Sheriff's Department that wants to come out and cut my grass. More than
So, all right. So maybe we should talk about that a little bit. It was a little bit for the less privileged there, Doctor. Again, I do understand you still cut your own grass. So
Push mowers too.
Yeah. I think we're looking at those communities that probably are a little more in need, so to speak. Yeah. Yeah. But so what happened is they actually pulled people out of the special unit of community policing and put them back in patrol. And if you remember, right around 2010, 2011, the citizens of Joliet kind of came to the county board or city board and said, hey, we want our community policing officers back. They were really missed.
Mm-hmm.
And they did bring them back, so the budget got a little looser and they brought them back. Now, look, when I talk about community policing and I talk about, reform policing and how we need to bring this forward, let me be clear. Community policing back in 1990, when it was introduced to the city of Joliet, was a special unit. It was a detached unit from patrol. They actually put the community policing officers into a different building than patrol. So patrol would be over here and your community policing officers were over here. I think that was a mistake. Now, I'm not blaming them. You don't build the perfect light bulb the first time out of the box, but I think it's a mistake to have separated the units because it kind of created a division. Community policing guys were special guys, got to move their schedule, come to work when they want, do what they want. So they were kind of, a little bit of a rub.
Tension.
Yeah. Now, my vision for community policing going forward is, community policing is a policing theory. It's a policing culture. It's something we have to go back and start over from kind of the beginning all the way to the police academy days and introduce community policing as it's a way of policing. It's not a separate unit. It's kind of a culture we need to bring starting from day one. And every officer should be a community policing officer, not a separate unit. And that's what I talk about in my book.
Because I think right around that time, also, you point out in chapter 3. If you
Okay, I'm not going to fall victim to every chapter, but yeah.
There was a bunch of cases that you point out need to be researched and discussed and maybe taught at the academies or for criminal justice students that need to be looked into. Laquan McDonald and Trayvon Martin, and a bunch of them where the police took a big hit to the reputation.
Yeah. And I do talk about that. And I think one of the things we have to do in policing is realize sometimes things don't go as well as we would hope. And it's not a knock on policing by any means. Again, law enforcement has over 300 million contacts a year with citizens of America. And often, we make mistakes, and it's just going to happen. It's a part of we're human too. And,
that's where you pointed out transparency is really big. And if you don't have the right kind of leadership at the top of the department and they're not being transparent, that just makes everything worse.
Well, of course. And that shows weak leadership, right? I mean, any leadership can come forward and say, look, a mistake was made. There's some of our departments are several hundred people. So, and they're answering tens of thousands of calls for service. I mean, mistakes are going to be made. And when they happen, you have to come forward as a leader and say, oh my gosh, that didn't go the way, we train, maybe even outside our policy. And, we have to look at that situation in totality and see if changes need to be made, whether it's with that specific officer or within our policies, to make sure it doesn't happen again. We learn and grow, as society changes. And that's a big part of being a good leader, is realizing and stepping forward and saying, hey, we screwed up. And I think society and neighborhoods and communities will actually appreciate that open and honest, dialogue.
Your legal department probably wouldn't.
Well, we don't. So that's talking about liability. And that's kind of a little bit of a rub to me, because the minute we start letting liability run the department, we're not ever going to be as effective as we can be. You run your department and you follow your policy, you follow your procedures, and let the liability fall where it will. And I think, again, that's a weak leadership that says, boy, I'm liable about that, or I worry about that, or I worry about getting sued. Because I hear that so often, and I'm like, oh my God, that just tells me your leadership doesn't understand their job, right? You do your job, you stand up for your deputies or your police officers, and you realize mistakes are going to be made, and you address them when they occur. But we don't let liability wag the tail of the dog, because then we're just too afraid to do our job. And then we're never going to be effective.
So if that be the case, out-of-court settlements in our county, should there be out-of-court settlements where they're not transparent?
It's a little bit of a double-edged sword. So out-of-court settlements, let's take a look at that. If you have a situation, let's say Laquan McDonald up in Chicago was shot 17 times by a police officer. And I think one officer fired 7, and I could be a little off on the number. And immediately Chicago PD ran and tried to make an out-of-court settlement with that individual's family.
Sure.
And that was because they didn't, want to be totally honest and transparent, in my opinion. They kind of wanted to make a quick settlement and maybe not bring the totality of the situation to the public. Well, later it came out exactly what they did, that they rushed to make a settlement. And when the video actually came out, a lot of people saw for the first time how bad the video appeared. And
who makes that final decision, Jim? Is that the chief of police or the sheriff, or is that the county executive? Or is it the state's attorney?
Yeah.
I mean, who makes the final decision where the buck stops here?
Yeah. So let me just finish that earlier statement.
Okay,
what happened was that really undermined the transparency of that situation. And then a lot of people felt like they couldn't trust law enforcement. So to answer your question, who makes that decision? That's going to come from your legal department. Specifically here in Will County, I'm sure the state's attorney's office has an input. I'm sure maybe they hire even outside attorneys that will, come in and give them guidance. And, it's decided whether an out-of-court settlement is better than going to court. And obviously the idea behind that is they can reduce or eliminate the cost to the taxpayers. I mean, sometimes it makes sense. Where we get frustrated in law enforcement, and not me specifically, but you might have someone that comes in and files a complaint on you. Oh, that deputy punched me in the nose and he shouldn't have. Well, the county attorney, under advice of whoever, state's attorney or outside attorney, will say, hey, let's give this guy $10,000 and make him go away, the alleged victim, because if we have to chase after this, $10,000 in legal fees is nothing nowadays. So they do that. Well, what did that just teach your offender? Right. I can make a rather false or totally fabricated allocation and get a $10,000 paycheck.
Becomes a career for him.
Yeah. And then as a law enforcement officer, you're like, hey, that's on my record. And, now look, they sit you down and say, look, we know you didn't do anything wrong, but we just settled them to get rid of them. Well, bullshit. There's an argument to be made. If we quit making those frivolous payouts, then we quit getting the frivolous lawsuits.
Right.
But, maybe that's...
Or you go after the people that filed the frivolous lawsuits.
There you go.
Instead of...
Yes. Yep. I'm a big supporter of that, boss.
I'm a big supporter of loser pays.
Yes.
So they can sue, but if you lose, you have to pay all the court costs and the expenses from the trial.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I didn't mean to bring this up intentionally, but I think you're just seeing that right now with the city of Joliet, where the former mayor came after and, tried to sue the department and wound up losing. And I don't know what exactly happened, whether statements were made that were inaccurate or something, but now the court has ruled where that former mayor may wind up paying part of the city of Joliet's legal fees. And that could be into the hundreds of thousands of dollars relatively quickly. Well, I hope every person out there sees that and says, maybe I shouldn't be filing these frivolous lawsuits.
That's really rare.
$838,000 in legal fees. Yeah. So there you go. How'd you like to be on the hook for that type of bill? And I don't know all the facts surrounding that case. I'm not passing judgment, but I just know it's a part of what's happening here in our community.
So you're saying that there's corruption and politically motivated hindsight?
Corruption. No, did I say that, Doctor? Yeah. Is that in the book somewhere? I don't know. Let's look.
Secretary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Darn it, it is in there. Yeah. Yeah. So, but I want to just clear up, when I start talking about we're right now, in my opinion, in a new phase of community policing. And we see these phases change about every 40, 50 years. And we should be right now starting to go into a new phase of policing, community policing. And I've kind of tagged it the, reduction era, chapter 5, reduction era, ERA policing, in the sense that we really have to start realizing we have to do more with less. We're always going to struggle for money. We're always going to be under budget restraints. We're always going to realize, look what's happening in policing. They're trying to defund us sometimes. That law enforcement really has to start doing more with less. And I've tagged it the reduction era policing.
Okay. I was noticing as I'm going through the book, chapter 4, a significant amount of chapter 4 is dedicated to the Safety Act. And I couldn't
walk past.
I couldn't get past, are you for it? Or are you against it?
Yeah. I told you the Democrats literally have labeled me Safety Act Reilly is what they call me. Safety Act Reilly. Look, obviously it's a horrible, horrible bill. And I may have mentioned this once or twice, but I think Governor J.B. Pritzker is just a terrible governor, and what an embarrassment he's been to the state. And he's come after law enforcement and called us Nazis and jackbooted thugs. And, what a horrible person to say those things about the hardworking men and women in law enforcement and all our first responders who are out there doing just a fantastic job every day, day in and day out. You don't hear about the 200,000 encounters we have a day where nothing went wrong,
Right.
So, to have someone like him come after us, and he's just been a spoon-fed billionaire his whole life. He's so out of touch with reality that, God, I pray every day we get rid of that man in November. And if we don't, the state may never be the same.
I mean, the other part that was enlightening to me is that the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program has shown a decrease in crime statistics over what was it, 2022, 23, 24. No, it was a 21, 22, 23. And they said, arrests, but when you look at 23, then violent crime went up, vehicular carjacking, and arrests, or an assault went up, but arrests were down 43%.
Yeah, and
So-
you want to take a guess why that was?
Morale.
There you go, boss. There you go.
Why arrest these guys if I know I'm going to take them in there? They're going to go in and walk right back out, ankle bracelet, perhaps. In the meantime, I'm there for 3 hours filling out report forms.
Well, the other thing that's interesting
100%.
is this Uniform Crime Reporting Program. It's dependent upon the data that it's getting.
Yes.
Because my understanding is that DC, the city of District of Columbia,
Does not report.
they didn't report, or what they reported was all false and
Yes.
was altered
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
make it look good.
Yeah. At one time, historically, way back when, I think we kind of, let me speak for myself. I guess I gave the Unified Crime Reporting Program more credence and reliability and trusted it more. But now you bring up an excellent point. Washington, D.C., we find out the chief of police there are allegations that they would actually change the character of the crime just to make it appear they had less crime. So you're seeing chiefs of police or sheriffs who are, don't want to be held accountable. So they just changed the reporting system. I'm old enough to remember back in the early 1990s under President Bill Clinton, we actually reclassified attempted murder and changed it to aggravated battery. So if you went to shoot somebody, it used to be attempted murder. If you tried to stab somebody, it used to be attempted murder. Well, they reclassified it and made it ag battery with a firearm or ag battery with a knife or baseball bat or whatever. And I'll never forget back in the 90s, Bill Clinton came out and said, attempted murders are down by 80%. Well, I'm sure they weren't down by anything, but the reclassification made
Exactly.
that politician have the ability to. And what a joke! And I mean, if you're in that line of work, you're like, that's not really true what he's saying. They just kind of any good statistician can make numbers. Trying to get our IT lady who was here, an accountant.
Statistics, damn statistics, and liars. Or,
Yeah, they can say what you want them to say, right?
Yep.
So be very careful about our statistics,
The other, not that I want to go through this chapter by chapter, but
no, I know it. I'm trying to.
the, ICE detainers versus warrants. So somewhere between, 0 and 20 million people were let into the country over the last couple of years.
Yes, sir. Since 2020.
Do you think that it's reasonable for the federal government to ask for 20 million warrants?
No. And that's the problem. And I think that's where ICE is kind of kicking back on wanting to have the ability to say, we have identified a legal immigrant who's in our country. And we've identified the fact that maybe that individual has a criminal history in their past, in their prior country, where had they gone through the proper channels to become a U.S. citizen, they would have been denied. So maybe in the country they came from, they had committed murder, or maybe, for God forbid, they're still wanted for murder. But now somehow they've slipped into our country, and ICE wants a detainer, meaning we want that individual and we want to deport that individual. Now, they haven't committed a crime, and the reason why I hesitate there is people say, well, isn't just being in America illegally a crime? And yes, it is. Being in illegal without proper paperwork or authority is a crime. Doesn't seem to be one that some people in the liberal agenda want to exactly follow up on, because you can theoretically go get a court date, and now you're not here illegally, you're here pending a court date. So now you're not, an illegal immigrant, you're an immigrant potentially waiting for a court date. But back to the detainer, ICE says we want to talk to that individual and we probably want to remove them from our country, because had they come through the legal channels, they would have not been allowed in. we argue in law enforcement, and I kind of am a supporter of this, that in order for law enforcement, local law enforcement, to go out and apprehend or hold somebody, we probably want a warrant. And that's a judicial warrant that you go in front of a judge, you argue your case, you're given probable cause, a judge gives you a warrant. Then ICE can, in fact, expect local officers to arrest and hold that individual with a judicial warrant. Detainers are just issued, my understanding, ICE officers can issue detainers, and we cannot act, local law enforcement cannot act on detainers alone.
So you would recommend them going in, and if they have a list of 600 or 700 names that they want to go in and round up,
Yes.
they need to argue 700 cases in front of a judge.
Yeah. Now, okay, and I know where you're going. Like, okay, is that even possible? And my argument would be then somehow ICE needs to address that. You're going to have to get yourself a federal judge, get that person in a room, maybe expedite the process, where an ICE officer can walk in and read off 10 names and say, these 10 people are in this country illegally. Here's the acts they've committed. We want judicial warrants for all these 10 people. You got to remember, if you're not a U.S. citizen, and I know this is being argued out there today in politics, but if you're not a U.S. citizen, should you be afforded the same judicial process as U.S. citizens? I say no. If you're here illegally, I don't think just being on American soil, you get the same judicial process. And I can hear the liberal heads out there exploding as I say that. But let's be clear, they were never given judicial process under Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or Joe Biden. But all of a sudden now they want to give illegal immigrants, judicial process here in America. And obviously 20 million people would clog our system. I don't think that's a realistic thing.
And what costs to enforce this?
Exactly. At what cost?
And do the taxpayers have to be burdened with this?
Unless the government has another source of funding, who else would?
Right.
Yeah, of course. And that's just ridiculous to think we should have to pick up that cost.
Sure.
So judicial warrants are definitely. It just takes the pressure off because, okay, so here's the argument. And I think this is what you're seeing with ICE. They're going after someone. Maybe they have a judicial warrant. Maybe ICE is acting on one of their detainers because they can act on detainers. They can definitely take people into custody on a detainer underneath their laws. And then when they're in that house and they're looking for that individual, now they find 500 people, 5 other people who maybe are in here in our country without, lawful authority, and they're taking those people into custody as well. And I think you're hearing ICE saying, this is the rules you've made for us to operate under, right? Are we now supposed to turn our back on those individuals and leave them here? Because now that's really where you're starting to cherry pick, and we can't let that happen, right? So yeah, we're going to take everybody into custody, take them down, process them, fingerprint them, get their criminal history, look at their background. If they are just here illegally without a checkered past or criminal history, then maybe we can give them a court date and allow them back into our community. I think that's understandable. So I think that's,
the difference between a warrant and a detainer. Why not just issue warrants, which would kind of encompass everything? Is it that hard? Is it that much more expensive? Is it hard to get a judge to sign a warrant? Why not just use warrants?
So that's kind of what we've been talking about is judicial warrants are signed by a judge. Yes, you have to argue your case in front of a judge. Detainers can be issued by ICE agents themselves.
The time involved.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's a totally different, scenario, time, money, yeah. You have to build up probable cause in front of a judge.
Yeah.
And, we all know how our judicial system, some of our judges are what I would say better than others,
What would you say would be a good way to improve the judicial system? Do the judges put in enough time in a day? Is it a lack of time, court time? Or is it just the fact that there's just so many cases and so few judges that it clogs the system?
I think it would clog up the court system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and remember, we're talking the federal system versus the local system.
That's
I mean,
true,
your federal system is going to have a lot fewer judges than your local state judges,
Good point.
So to kind of expect them to take on Yeah, 20 million cases. I think that's probably a bit
Bit large.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because again, comes down to
Who's got the money?
lies, damn lies, and statistics. For a
Yeah.
lot of this stuff.
Yeah. When we're talking about community policing and one of the things under the Safety Act, I want to just talk about these ankle monitors because we're seeing more and more of those. And there is a chapter dedicated to the Safety Act and ankle monitors, and statistical data is included where people are reoffending while they're sitting on these ankle monitors, and they're being, people convicted of people convicted of murder and then charged with murder, which is that individual you just saw down in, was it Moments, where the guy walked into a bar and shot that poor bar owner execution style. And then we find out that, again, 7-time, 8-time offender, double homicide in his early life, and he's out walking the streets. What a failure, this ankle monitor system has been. I don't think anybody convicted of a violent crime should be out on the street. I don't think, if you're convicted of a violent crime and then now recharged with a violent crime, I think there's a pattern there, and we need to hold these people in jail. They should not be sent home on ankle monitors. And I've made this clear that underneath the current system, they get, 2 days off a week to go do whatever they want where they're not monitored. I was at a debate the other day. A guy came up to me and said, "No, you're wrong there. They're monitored 7 days a week." And I said, "No, sir, underneath the Safety Act, 5 days monitor, 2 days off a week, non-monitored." So what a joke, that system is, and I one of the things I hope this book will do, and I appreciate you guys taking time out of your schedule to do a podcast for the book, is please read it and understand that underneath the Safety Act, there's a lot of crazy rules and law, underneath the Safety Act that really has handcuffed law enforcement where we can't even do our job no more. So back to why our arrests down 43% from 2020, till today. Well, how often can you kick that law enforcement officer? And, we've seen that here locally where the poor officers are in the station doing the reports and the guy's already out walking the street.
Yeah. And that's
Catch and
what
release.
Yeah.
the recidivism rate for certain crimes, especially violent crimes, is pretty damn high. It's like 50%
Yes.
within 3 years.
Yes.
Should these people, after strike 2, strike 3, because they've already shown that they're serial recidivists
Yes.
of whatever they're accused of doing,
Yeah.
shouldn't, for violent crimes and maybe certain property crimes, be a special category
Yeah.
and make those people special people that need to be removed from polite society for a long, long, long time?
Yes. Yes. You know what I mean? I think that's the argument to be made. And let's go back real quick to that situation of Moments. That guy was a part of a double homicide. Now you got to be somewhat warped individual to be a part of a double homicide, right? I mean, you're not really a person I want in my community. And he had done that. I think it was 1995. Now we're here 30 years later. He's already out walking around. So obviously wasn't held accountable for a double homicide. What does that teach him? Hey, I can just commit this crime and be back out on the street. And then, now we're seeing him commit another violent act and then another violent act. And, was it California? I think it was 72 felonies the guy had. I mean, it was, just when do you just start laughing at our system? And in my opinion, we're there now. We're there now. We're laughing at our system. There's just no accountability.
He was a good boy. He's getting his life back together.
Yeah.
It makes me think of the poor woman that has an order of protection, who's been assaulted in the past, and the guy gets ankle bracelet that he gets to take off 2 days out of the week.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's that poor woman thinking? Me and my kids, are we safe?
So I think that the lack of support by leadership is a big piece of this puzzle, which leads to, unfortunately, hesitation by the officers, not only of arresting people, but in the field.
Yeah. And this is a great opportunity to bring up the point. This book, if you read the dedication page, is, dedicated to law enforcement and all of our first responders. Just and of course to my son first and foremost, but just so proud to work with the men and women in law enforcement and all our first responders. And, I've had the privilege of seeing firsthand all these people that are just wonderful, hardworking men and women, all across the board, from our firemen to our dispatchers to, our law enforcement, and just the fantastic job they do day in and day out, and just not given credit for what they do. And then when we have leadership, and this isn't specific, I'm not being specific to any one department or location, but when you just see overall leadership that fails to support law enforcement, or maybe is critical of their own department, which I think if you're going to criticize your own department, isn't that just criticizing your leadership? I mean, that's your job, right, to lead that department. So I've always kind of chuckled at that. But these people do such a great job day in and out. It's always just been a privilege. I'm honored and humbled to work with the men and women in law enforcement and all our first responders. They do a fantastic job, and definitely a large part of this book is dedicated to them. So
how do you balance integrity, leadership, and the political pressure that comes with all of it?
So from what point of view? Are you talking from a law enforcement officer? How do we balance that? So look, integrity is in personal integrity, and that's something, nobody has to tell me to do the right thing when nobody's looking. I've done that my entire life. And early in my political career, the corrupt Democrat came after me and tried to question my integrity. And I think that was slapped down rather quickly, because people know who I am. People know what officers can be trusted and not trusted. And look, we know we have bad officers. We do. But when you're working the streets and when you're a law enforcement officer, your integrity, people see it and they know it, and they see how you treat people, and they see how you treat, you can go treat the businessman, well, and people see it. And then you go treat that homeless person with that same act of kindness or compassion, your fellow officers are going to see that. So we learned right away what officers are good officers and what officers aren't. So integrity is a personal issue that every officer, we know. Go ask, you want to know about the integrity of an officer, go ask another officer. And, I sleep very well at night. My integrity is without question. How do I balance the politics? Well, right now, I think, I think I want to read real quick the opening line of chapter 1, because one might wonder why a discussion of politics, particular in Illinois, is relevant to this book about community policing. And the answer is straightforward. Politics have increasingly infiltrated the criminal justice system, leading to significant consequences for law enforcement and public safety. I feel politicians expect law enforcement to just be robots, and we're not. And we've seen this with, definitely the liberal left agenda, who just attacks law enforcement day in and day out. Let me be clear. They've come after us, and I'm going to stand up and I'm going to fight them every day of my career to prove that their message is wrong. The liberal agenda, the liberal message of law enforcement being bad or not good men and women is wrong. And every day of my career, through my integrity, through my leadership, and hopefully through this book, I'm going to fight back. And that's the purpose of this book, is to point out it's not law enforcement that's the problem. It's the liberal agenda.
I think, too, that with the community policing aspect, that could be revitalized by, maybe not so aggressively going after minor violations, calling the balls and strikes, kind of like a referee. The problem there is, if you don't go after the people with for an example, be an open container in a certain neighborhood, then should they be going after people with open containers in another neighborhood?
Yeah, enforcement efforts, and you're exactly right. And I think that argument is made on both sides of the aisle, right? I mean, our less fortunate communities are saying we don't want to be over-policed. And, if you're going to over-police us, go over-police that community. And yes, you do have to keep that balancing act in place. And no community should be over-policed. That's the argument in this book, is we need to go into any community and realizing, the guys, 4 or 5 guys sitting out on the bed of their pickup truck having a beer in the street, maybe that's not legal, but, let's not be so quick to write, tickets. Let's just ask them to take it in the backyard or take it up in their own yard. Allow them the opportunity to, corrective measures without consequences that are punitive, where they're costing money. Let's face it, who has money nowadays to spend a $250 ticket? I think that's terrible. We have a local community that's writing $700 tickets if you're in the water of their river, and I just think that's excessive. Well, and that's often without warnings. Now, their argument would be we have signs, but whatever. We don't want law enforcement to be a revenue generating, problem. Now, look, if you tell those individuals, hey, can you take it up on the road or take it up in your backyard or something, and let's say you get blowback, or let's say you've been there 3 times that week, you have to have other tools in the toolbox, to get that message across. And maybe you start with that ordinance ticket, which is $100 ticket or whatever, So you don't want to be afraid to take corrective action if necessary. I just think the initial phases we need to kind of soften up a little bit in the minor violations.
Okay. And which also brings about resource allocation. So it would be nice, when you, so to speak, roll up on this pickup truck, and you go and talk to them, you make friends with them. Hey guys, need you to take it in the backyard. And then maybe the second time or third time, maybe send out some sort of social worker or something. I don't know. Maybe a better example is this is the 5th time you got called to this house about a domestic battery.
Yeah. So
they're both accusing one another of whatever. After the second or third time, having the resources to be able to send somebody to the home to say, hey, let's sit down, and maybe you two shouldn't be living with one another.
No, we've had that conversation, I can assure you. We're 3rd time this week. What are you guys doing here?
Exactly. But that's not a police job.
Yeah. So we do, and I think that's, go ahead, I'm sorry.
But the problem there is that we have no social services.
There are departments that would disagree. We do have services available. Are they being utilized correctly or to the point, or, the way they could be? I would argue not necessarily, or maybe there's room for improvement would be a better answer. But yeah, I think that's the underlying,
exactly. Yeah.
issue is something we have to address. Look, and by empowering those road deputies that are going out on the street, by giving them more authority to start, don't just walk up and answer the call for service, write the report, and drive on to your next call. Look at that call. Is there something you could do? Is it, a car got broken into, and, 2 doors away, another car got broken into. Well, maybe we need to, add additional units to that area, or maybe we need to put in some undercover units, or, maybe we need to put in some cameras, or, let's start taking some proactive steps to reduce criminal behavior. And sometimes that can be social work. Sometimes that can be undercover units. Sometimes that could be, we have a multitude of resources available to us if you have the right leadership. Again, falls back on leadership. You got to be able to take and be proactive, be involved, be there day in and day out, and really care about your department. If you have the wrong leadership, none of this matters. You can throw this book in the river,
Well, don't do that. You get a ticket.
Yeah. That's true.
But going back to the resource allocation, going back to, say, the not so well kept up truck stop. Now, where the deputy can identify the problem, but then that's not the deputy's job to contact the owner and say, hey, do all this. Wouldn't that be the local government that should step in and do their job?
Well, but boss, that's kind of where we're at today. It's kind of the fingers pointed down the road. And no, I think a part of my book and part of my theory going forward is we need to empower that deputy to open up, sometimes they have different acronyms. One's called POP, P-O-P, problem-oriented policing. And you actually open up a case assignment and you identify that target location. You identify what the problems are. You identify the repeated calls for service. And then you start looking for what resources do I need to fix this problem. At that time, you empower that deputy. And again, I have no problem changing their work schedule. Maybe they're supposed to be off tomorrow. We'll come in, work tomorrow. We'll pay you 4 or 5 hours overtime. Reach out for that owner. Reach out for that person. Reach out for, our neighborhood programs, or reach out for our building and zoning, and have that deputy empowered to do that on his own and make those calls for service and make those contacts and have those people come out and kind of empower that deputy to make those changes. How powerful would that be? I just think that's a brilliant idea. Then maybe you're not called back. And the deputy gets out of it, hey, this is my zone, this is my area. Now I'm not coming back here 10 times a week. You know what I mean? So the deputy kind of gets a little something out of it too, you know. And then I think a good leader, of course, you're going to identify those individuals or deputies that take it upon themselves to do this, you know. And I don't think it's a specialized unit anymore. Again, I think community policing is more a culture than a specialized unit. I think we need to go all the way back, again, I said it earlier, to the police academy and start training these new theories from day one. But until we get there, then you will have supervisors that oversee or maybe collect these pop projects and, you know, make sure they're being, you know, followed through or give credit where credit is due. I'm big into recognizing our staff members who go above and beyond. And, you know, let me be honest too. Not every law enforcement officer is going to read this book and buy into my theory. You know, I was young once. I probably thought this was a bunch of crap. You know, I remember seeing police officers raking yards thinking, you know, this is not police work. What the hell are they doing? You know, I want to chase bad guys. I'm older. I'm wiser. I think this is a new policing culture, a new policing theory. But I also realize what's in this book is not for every law enforcement officer. But if you can read it, review it, if you pick up a little bit of it and maybe it changes your job a little bit, I've done something.
You have. Through your research, you actually pointed out, you gave us some of your research statistics in there, and you pointed out that majority of people want the same thing.
Yes.
You know, across different cultures, different socioeconomics,
Black, brown, Asian, poor, rich, gay, straight, lesbian. I don't care what you are.
They pretty much want a police force that's professional, has a rapid response, and solves major crimes.
Yes. Yeah. And let me kind of explain to that effect. This book is kind of an integration of my dissertation project of 2019, again, which was kind of a dry read, quantitative charts, graphs. And I kind of brought that into this book and molded it together and then kind of made it a little more palatable and brought in some local issues that I thought were important with where we're at for policing. However, I did keep the graphs and the charts in there because I think they're important. And during the dissertation studies in these graphs and charts, there's questions asked based on age, based on income, you know, what's important to you and what do you expect from your law enforcement? I think that's kind of interesting to read because you kind of get an insight to what people expect and what they want from their law enforcement. And you brought up a good point. I think the top two are response time and professionalism.
Yeah.
People often say, oh, you know, minority communities want minorities to police them. And I found in my research, that's not true. That's not true. Minority communities just want honest, hardworking law enforcement that are professional and treating them with respect and responding quickly and giving their calls for servants the same attention they would in any community. That's really what's important. And I think, you know, in my graphs, you'll see some of that. And I hope people don't just gloss over the graphs. I know they can be dry, but there is some relevant information in there.
Yeah. And then, so you have a area in here. It says when promotions and decisions.
Are you going to do this? Yeah, go ahead, boss.
Are based on
I did not put him up to this, people of this podcast. I did not put him up to this.
Rather than merit, misconduct also often goes unaddressed. These agencies may avoid transparency and community engagement, further eroding public confidence.
Yeah.
Ultimately, poor leadership damages not only the department's reputation, but also the broader relationship between law enforcement and the community.
Yeah. Look, boss, I'm a firm believer in law enforcement. We are a community. We are a brotherhood. We also know, again, I touched on this earlier. In law enforcement, we know what officers are good and great and out there doing their job and honest integrity. And we also know what officers that, you know, you have your concerns about. Let's just leave it at that. So in a community such as the Will County community, different departments get different reputations. You know, you asked me about, let's say Naperville. Naperville is known as a great department, very supportive of their officers. They're very professional. They're very dedicated. Almost to a T, every Naperville officer I've ever met, encountered, or had, you know, business with, I've always walked away thinking, wow, man, that guy's pretty squared away. You know what I mean? And you just see that reputation within that department. You also find other departments based on leadership, not so much. And people know and that's my message to whatever leader out there who maybe isn't honest, or maybe doesn't have integrity, or maybe is questionable. We all know, and I want those leaders to know, we all know in law enforcement who we respect and admire, and we also know what other leaders are an embarrassment to law enforcement.
So essentially what you're saying is that effective leadership in law enforcement must be rooted in respect, trust, and unshakable integrity.
Yes, sir.
Unfortunately, there are agencies led by elected officials who manipulate policies for their personal gain, misuse in public funds, or lie about internal community incidents to protect themselves.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
These leaders believe that winning election grants them respect or acceptance, and surround themselves by appointees who reinforce this illusion.
That's true. Yeah, I said that.
So
Yeah, it's in the book, page 142. You're going to walk right up to that line, aren't you?
So, well, if somebody that may not be a good leader has
Careful.
surrounded himself with, let's say, political sycophants and lackeys, does that person automatically, should they be in line to take their job when they retire?
No, of course not. Right. I mean, and of course, I'm not talking about any specific department or police agency. We're talking in general terms here, but no, corruption bequeaths corruption. If what you've learned is poor leadership, and then now you want to, follow in the footsteps of the person who kind of is promoting your path, I think there's reason to believe that individual coming up behind that person with poor leadership skills is going to be a poor leader. That's my belief. I think if that's your learned behavior, if you look towards that individual for guidance and that's your moral fabric that you've learned, I think that kind of taints you as who you are and, what you're going to be, because you've learned the wrong path, so to speak.
So you're saying that the people of Illinois deserve leadership that prioritizes safety, truth, and accountability, not empty promises and dangerous shortcuts disguised.
Yeah, and I would say that across the board, not only police agencies, but in our politics in general. Yes, of course, we need leadership that has integrity and honesty and, does the right thing when nobody's looking. That's an important character to, that's what we want in all our political leaders.
So overall, a very, very strong, very interesting book to read. Not a lot of pictures. There's one picture.
One picture, I know. And
only
I
one picture. I was kind of depressed.
Yeah.
Usually, you think, oh my gosh, there's going to be some pictures, so it won't be so long. No, there's only one freaking picture.
We can talk briefly. Historically, when I started bringing this book together, and this book took me 2 years to, kind of start and stop and put down and come back to, and it's been a 2-year bringing together. And when you put it together, and I was up to 160, 70,000 words, and that's right around a 250-page book. And then you kind of I hired an editor out of New York, wonderful lady who's just fantastic, really brought the book together for me, because I'm not a writer, right? I mean, let's face it, I my name's on this book, but I had a great editor, and then you hire someone to lay out your cover design and your book formatting. So a lot of people have their fingers in this book. My name's on the cover, but a lot of people made this happen. And but when you finally get it done and you're down to 145, 50,000 words, and it's a 180, 90-page book, and it's something I am proud of. It's something that will be out there for a long time.
So if somebody wanted to have one of these for their very own,
yes.
How would they do it?
So it is available on Amazon.com underneath. Yeah, all you go to Amazon.com and type in more community policing, less politics. And there's 3 different formats. You can get the KDP, which is the Kindle online format. I think that's free. I make a deal with them where I offered the online version for free. But in exchange, they promote my book on their website. So then paperback is $19.99 and the hardcover is $27.99. And, this is something I'm proud of. It really incorporates what's happening in law enforcement, specifically in the state of Illinois, throughout Will County. I want it to be a voice of law enforcement that we've kind of had enough. The politicians have drug our name through the mud long enough, and it needs to stop. And I hope law enforcement will organize. I hope law enforcement and all our first responders will get behind this book and get behind the movement. It's time to fight back and tell J.B. Pritzker he's wrong. Tell the Mayor Johnson of Chicago he's wrong, and all our liberal politicians that continue to attack law enforcement. I hope the community will get behind us and support us, and kind of time to take back our community and hold people accountable and quit using law enforcement as a scapegoat. I even have a quote.
Okay.
Yeah, page 81. Too often politicians are quick to blame society for the actions of individuals, when in reality it is the individual who shapes society we live in. And I thought that was a little Reagan-esque in the fact that, it's time to just hold individuals accountable. And whatever your background is, whatever color you are, whatever your sexual preference is, doesn't allow you to bully or victimize other people. And if you're the type of character that can hurt other people, then as far as I'm concerned, you need to go to jail, and you need to be held in jail, and you need to have consequences. And enough with the DEI excuses.
Well, the other thing about consequences too is that elections have consequences.
Oh, well, there you go, boss.
And unless we get people in that live in the real world, that see how the real world and real people interact with one another, you're going to have people that live in ivory towers or behind gated communities that don't understand what it's like.
Yeah, 100%.
To go to that truck stop.
Yeah, and let me bring that specifically right here to the state of Illinois. We're going into an election cycle. We have J.B. Pritzker on the Democratic side, who is just, again, one of the worst governors in the history of our state. We have some fantastic Republican governor candidates, Darren Bailey and Jimmy Mendricks and Ted Dabrowski, Rick Heidner. I haven't talked to Rick Heidner, but I can tell you the first three are all in agreement that the Safety Act is a horrible act and it needs to be reformed and changed. So I'm not only asking, I'm actually just damn near begging the people of Illinois, we have to get rid of J.B. Pritzker. We have to elect a good conservative governor. We have a primary coming up in 3 weeks. Elect who you want to elect. I will be working very hard behind whatever Republican governor candidate gets elected and try to get them elected and try to make, significant changes on how law enforcement is treated throughout this state.
One of our listeners sent in a...
yeah. So, let me...
maybe we can close out the show.
Okay, let me bring up, IT did want me to point out underneath the Amazon.com, you go to Amazon.com, you type in More Community Policing, Less Politics, great book. Please buy a copy for your family and friends. Underneath the online version, I guess the ebook version is $4.99. However, if you have the Kindle Unlimited subscription, then it's free. So the ebook is $4.99 unless you have the subscription, where then it's free. But you're probably going to prefer a paperback copy because you want to have this. Let's face it, you want to have that sitting on the coffee table at home and be able to refer back to that often. And if you're in law enforcement or your family is law enforcement, buy one for your first responder family and friends.
Okay. So were you going to say something?
So earlier today, let me just, I think we're getting ready to wrap this up. And again, I just want to say thank you both for kind of coming out today and helping me promote my book. It is something that I'm very proud of, and you guys are a big part of it. Thank you. Earlier today, I did have I think I can say follower, send me a little jingle, and I just thought it was kind of catchy and fun. And, being in my position, sometimes people will send me stuff, and I don't know why this one kind of tickled me a little bit. And I told him I'd send it to you to see if we could incorporate it into the podcast today. So I think we're going to go out on a little jingle that was sent to me today by a good friend named John, and I appreciate it. And I guess we'll just kind of ride off into the sunset. More Community Policing, Less Politics, available on Amazon.com.
And we're around Will County.
Around Will County.
Badge on his chest, boots in the dust, years on the street, earned their trust. Kick town back, you better elect Jim. Pages of his past, inked in black and blue. Still a record shining, every word is true. Catching every outlaw, never letting go. When his book hits the shelves, the whole world's gonna know. Jim is the next sheriff, riding in, heads turned. Tough on crime, no easy line, let the guilty burn. Cleaning up Will County, straightening the lost thin rim. If you want your town back, you better elect Jim. Rip out the rules that tied our hands, bring back the law that understands. No more hiding in the cracks they slip through. Jim's gonna fix what they broke into. Jim is the next sheriff, riding in, heads turned. Tough on crime, no easy line, let the guilty burn. Cleaning up Will County from the brim to the limb. The bestseller lawman, that's Sheriff Jim.